Okay, hi everyone. So semantic space is designed in a way that similar items that have similar semantics basically are close together if we represent them as points in the space. So for example, organizations are close together, and foods, colors, animals. But the key phenomenon in language is ambiguity. So we have words like apple, chicken, orange, that basically belongs to multiple semantic classes. So for example, apple is organization and food, or chicken is an animal and is also a food. So the question is how do these words actually locate in this semantic space? And if we want to look at an example of how we actually learn embeddings for ambiguous words, is as follows. So we have apple mentions that are basically conflated mentions from different meanings of apple. And then we learn embeddings using, for example, word2vec and get embedding for apple, which is a conflated representation for apple. And you may ask, okay, with the invention of BERT and such models, we don't have this issue anymore, but actually they also in the input layers, they have these conflated representations of meanings. So in summary, word embeddings are conflated representations. We basically conflate one or multiple meanings, basically multiple meanings, usually, mostly, into single vector. And the question is, how do we understand, how much do we understand from this vector, and how can we extract these meanings from this vector? So our motivation is that the current methods for understanding meaning representation basically are limited by small data sets that they use point-based similarity between vectors, and by the downstream tasks in which we basically conflate the quality of embeddings with the quality of our task model, basically the architecture that does the task. So it is still pretty much unclear how the meanings are represented in word embeddings. So we try to basically make it more clear by designing probing tasks for word embeddings using semantic classes. So probing task is actually is a term that is used for sentence embeddings, but it was actually introduced and used for word embeddings before sentence embeddings. And so the two probing tasks that we did is, first is semantic class prediction, and the second is ambiguity prediction. So for semantic class prediction, for each of the semantic classes, like food, we divide the space into two subspaces. One subspace that is basically the words that are food, and this other subspace are the words that are not food. Ambiguity prediction is basically, we just divide the space into two subspaces, whether they're ambiguous or they're not ambiguous. In more details, for semantic class prediction, we're given an embedding, and we want to predict its semantic classes. So we have a set of predefined semantic classes, and then we have to basically do a multi-label classification from embedding and find one or multiple semantic classes. For example, for apple, we have to find that apple is a food and apple is an organization. Ambiguity prediction. So again, we are given an embedding. Here we have to find out if the embedding belongs to an ambiguous word or an unambiguous word. So basically, we have two labels, ambiguous or unambiguous. For apple, for example, it would be ambiguous. So to do our probing task, we build a resource based on Wikipedia. So it's called WikiPSE, and we use the linked mentions in Wikipedia and 34 classes from figure taxonomy. So here is an example to show how we build a data set. So in the first context, we have a linked mention of Apple that links to the Wikipedia page of Apple as the fruit apple. And then from the Wikipedia page, we can link to a knowledge base and then find out that apple is a food, basically. And similarly, in the second and third context, we can link to Wikipedia and then knowledge base and find out that apple is referring to organization. And when we aggregate all the classes that Apple has, we basically build this word to semantic class data set. So we have Apple here that is annotated with food and with organization. And the nice thing is that we also have the frequency of each semantic class. So we know how frequent Apple is food and how frequent Apple is organization. So some statistics. We have around 88K words annotated with 34 semantic classes with an average of 1.75 labels per class. And the corpus contains sentences that they have at least one linked mention or anchor link, which results in 550 million tokens. So to do our analysis, we tested 3 different word embedding baselines. The first is the standard word embeddings, and the second and third are based on class-specific meaning of class-specific embeddings of words. And okay, so the standard embedding is simple. So basically, we have this mentions of Apple. We run word2vec and we get embedding for Apple, right? So to learn class-specific embedding, since we have the annotations in our corpus, so we can basically learn different embeddings for different classes of a word. For example, we have different embeddings for food and organization for the word Apple. And then we define the word embedding as a function of this class-specific embeddings. So the simplest one is uniform sum. So basically, we sum up the embeddings. And the second is weighted sum, which we weight the embeddings by the relative frequency of the meaning. So experiments. So the first experiment is on the probing task of semantic class prediction. And just to remind you, it's a multi-label classification. Given an embedding, we have to find one or more classes. So here are the results of logistic regression classifier on our 3 different word embeddings. So we have the word weighted and uniform. And as you can see, uniform is best. Word embedding is the second and weighted is third. And for larger embeddings, we basically have better predictions. And in a similar setup, if we use nearest neighbors, we still have the same result as uniform is best. But actually, if we have larger embeddings, the result is worse. So we have worse predictions. And we relate this to the fact that we have curse of dimensionality, and nearest neighbors in higher dimensions are more noisy, which results in worse prediction for semantic classes. Here we analyze some other factors that are important in the prediction. So ambiguity level basically is how many meanings a word has. So as you can see, if a word has one meaning, then the extraction quality is very high, but it is actually pretty stable. So especially uniform is pretty stable. So we can say that it can represent many meanings, 10, 13 meanings, and it has a quite stable result. The second factor is dominance. So how dominant the meaning is very important in prediction quality or extraction of the meaning. And here again, uniform is best. But here we see a sharp drop in 0.4 or 0.3 in the extraction results. So basically, if a word is rare, if a meaning is rare in the word, then the extraction basically hurts. So the second probing task is ambiguity prediction. Just to remind, so we want to predict if an embedding is ambiguous or not. Here are the results for logistic regression classifier. The random baseline is 50%. if we use word frequency, we get around 64.8% accuracy. And if we use word embeddings, we get almost 78% accuracy. So we can actually say that we can predict the ambiguity from the embedding. So if you have an embedding, you can basically predict with very high accuracy if this embedding is for an ambiguous word or not. And this is similar for weighted and much higher result for uniform. So uniform basically keeps all the information about all the meanings. So to show how these findings reflect in real or tasks where words are used in context, we use 5 different classification tasks, and we average the context to represent the sentence or to represent the span that we want to classify. And in general, what we got is actually contradictory with the findings of probing tasks. So the embeddings that are actually have better representation of meanings, they do worse on these data sets. So actually uniform is the worst, and then word embeddings and weighted. And here is just as a reference that you see that the difference is quite significant actually. So, and we relate this to the fact that most of the time we only care about the dominant meanings in the tasks. And therefore, if an embedding has a better representation of rare meanings, it actually hurts. So in summary, we introduced the Wiki PSC dataset. We had 2 probing tasks, semantic class prediction and ambiguity prediction. And our finding is that we can predict with very high accuracy if an embedding represents an ambiguous word or unambiguous word. The uniform sum of the meanings or senses of a word is a very high quality representation of all the meanings, even if the word embedding is not. And we can conclude that the main problem is not ambiguity, is actually the rare sentence. And finally, for many common NLP benchmarks, only frequent senses are needed. And therefore, even if you have an embedding that represents all the meanings well, it actually might not reflect in the benchmark results. So thank you. You can download the data set also in the